The Forgotten Scarf by Demi B, 2025. Louise felt the season turn in the space between breaths. The wind came thready and cool along the village street, tugging at shop signs and lifting a scatter of yellow leaves. She snugged her long woolen scarf, faded stripes soft with years, closer to her throat, and paused at the baker's window where nutmeg and apple steam fogged the glass. Louise tucked a loose curl back under her scarf, its coils springing stubbornly free again. A brighter gust shouldered past, playful and sure. The scarf slipped on a whisper, slid from her shoulders, and lifted like a kite suddenly loosed from string. Louise laughed, startled and reached. Fingertips brushed wool. Then the wind gathered it up and sent it sailing. It skimmed the cobbles, twirled over a puddle, and vanished around the square's corner with its fringe trailing like a tail. "Don't wander far," she murmured to no one, hand resting where the warmth had been. The air smelled faintly of chimney smoke. Somewhere a bell rang the hour. Autumn, it seemed, had decided to keep moving. At the iron school gate, a small boy and his little sister waited for their father's cart. The boy stamped for warmth. The girl traced fog shapes on the cold rail with her thumb. The scarf came tumbling down the lane like a friendly ribbon set free. It wrapped the boy's shins, then flopped at his boots. He grinned, scooped it up, and wound it twice around his neck until the ends nearly brushed the ground. "Look," he said, voice muffled in wool. The girl clapped at once and tried to twirl beneath the hanging fringe. The wind calmed to a steady hush, pleased with its delivery. The scarf smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine needles after rain. The boy stood taller. He was, for a moment, a prince with a banner, and a task only he understood. Keep your sister warm, keep her laughing, keep waiting from feeling like forever. A cart rumbled up, its wheels ticking, and their father waved from the bench. "Home, you two." The boy looked at the scarf, at his sister's reddening ears, then unwound the loops and draped the wool around her instead. The girl burrowed into the softness until only her eyes showed. "Share," he told her, in the solemn tone of someone discovering a rule. He tucked the tail inside her coat and watched her bounce onto the cart bench, warmer now, worries forgotten. When the cart jolted forward, the scarf slipped, once, twice, and slid free like a fish slipping the line. The girl reached, missed, and then laughed, because it did not feel like losing. It felt like the scarf had other places to be. The wind caught the fringe, nudging it upward, and the wool flipped end over end down the street, already seeking its next pair of hands. On the sheltered side of the square, a young painter set her easel where the wind couldn't bully her canvas. She tested the sky with thin strokes, rinsing her brush in a cracked jar, boot tapping time to the town's clatter. The scarf coasted along the curb with the lazy certainty of a leaf in a slow river, then bellied up against her ankle. She reached down, surprised, and shook rain specks from the fringe. "Well, hello," she murmured, amused by the luck of it. She draped the scarf across her lap, and the gathered warmth eased the ache in her fingers. Autumn's sun slid behind a passing cloud. The scarf held enough heat to keep her steady. In the wool, she smelled chimney smoke, apple peel, and a ghost of a tune drifting from somewhere across the square. She breathed in, squared her shoulders, and mixed a braver color. As the sky thinned toward afternoon, a couple paused behind the painter to watch rooftops rise on the paper, soft lines finding themselves. The painter glanced at the scarf and at the couple's breath curling pale in the air. "Here," she said, surprising herself with the ease of it. She wrapped the wool briefly around the woman's shoulders, just long enough for some of its warmth to leap across, then laid it back on her knees. "For luck," she nodded toward the sketch. Coins clinked into her tin, small thanks for the feeling more than the picture. When the painter stood to stretch, the wind, patient as a cat, tugged at the fringe until the scarf slid down and slipped away. She didn't call after it. Instead, she wiped her hands on an old rag and smiled at the empty spot on her lap, as if the scarf had signed her work and moved on. The scarf sailed around a lamppost, dropped and wrapped itself across two sets of walking hands. The young couple laughed at once, the sound bright as struck glass. He loosened his grip to gather one striped end. She gathered the other. Then, in foolish joy, they looped the scarf around both of their wrists, so they were tethered by color. "It's a sign," he teased. "Of what?" she asked, already smiling. "That the wind approves," he said, and she rolled her eyes because she liked it when he played at being earnest. The air smelled like roasted chestnuts from a brazier further on. Leaves scuffed along the curb as if clapping politely. The scarf, companionable and sure, took their warmth and gave it back. For a moment, even the wind rested. The couple walked to the park's edge, tangled and laughing. A stroller squeaked nearby. A dog shivered despite its sweater. An older woman huddled on a bench. The girl stroked the scarf's fringe, surprised at how alive it felt, as though it breathed back her warmth. "It's too fine to keep," she whispered, the words trembling with affection. He nodded, his grip loosening, though he lingered an extra heartbeat, as if the scarf tethered more than hands. Together, they let it rise into the air. The scarf drifted gently, hovering once as though blessing them, before floating toward the older woman. She caught it in surprise and laughed, a sound like remembering an old love song. The couple watched it go and felt, without saying, that sometimes the most enduring bond is knowing when to give something forward. Their hands, no longer bound by wool, stayed clasped all the same. By the market, a vendor stacked pears into a pyramid that leaned like a tired traveler. He whistled through his teeth, arguing kindly with a wobbling crate. The scarf twined around an empty hook on his cart, as if testing its balance. "What's this?" he said, unhooking it and slinging it around his neck with a practiced twist. The wool sat perfectly, as if it had been waiting for that very knot. Wind pushed a cold thread under his collar. The scarf shrugged it off. Business warmed with the afternoon. He joked with a girl counting coins. "Careful, they'll spin themselves if you blink." and nudged a grandfather toward honey the color of late sun. His breath curled like little ghosts and vanished, leaving his grin behind. The scarf held the heat he didn't have time to notice. A woman approached with a sleeping baby bundled tight, but a draft got under the blanket and the baby's legs shivered beneath the knit. The vendor didn't think long. He unwound the scarf and tucked it loosely across the bundle, tucking the fringe under so it wouldn't tickle a nose. "For the walk," he said, as if this were part of the price of pears. The mother's shoulders lowered, relief like a small thank you to the air. She promised to return it tomorrow. He waved the promise away. When she reached the corner, the scarf wriggled loose again, gentle, certain. It slid free without waking the child and skimmed along the street with a satisfied rustle. The vendor chuckled and told his crates, "Good wool." They stayed stacked as if in agreement. At home, Louise set a kettle to hum and stood by the window over the square, tracing the route she'd walked that morning. Without the scarf, her coat collar felt too sharp against her throat, as if it remembered where softness ought to be. She let herself think of the day she'd first received it, her husband handing it across the hearth on their second autumn together, saying she deserved something as steady as warmth itself. Now, without it, she felt as if her warmth had walked away and was wandering without her. A child's laugh drifted faintly from another room, and the sound pricked her with absence. A tune from a fiddler below threaded up the brick, thin at first, then fuller. Steam fogged the pane near her breath. She wrote nothing in it with her fingertip, though she longed to draw a single stripe. She told herself scarves didn't think, didn't feel, and yet she imagined her wool moving from shoulder to shoulder like a traveling hearth. She cupped her tea, whispering to the glass, "If you're out there, mind the corners." In the side street where laundry lines cut the sky into ribbons, the scarf fluttered down and kissed the knees of an older woman, easing herself onto a stoop. She wore sturdy shoes and a sweater with the elbows patched neatly, and she folded letters with the care of someone who writes often and well. "Mercy," she said, startled as the wool slipped across her lap. She ran her palm along the stripes and felt in them the particular kindness of something kept long and clean. "You're a traveler, aren't you?" she murmured. The wind toyed with a drying sheet, making a low applause. She lifted the scarf to her shoulders and found it remembered exactly where to sit. Nostalgia tucked in her chest. For a full minute, she simply breathed and let the fabric teach her skin to be warm again. As the boy turned the corner, the scarf wriggled loose with a flicker, like a small animal eager to keep running. He caught one end, startled by its insistence, then passed it to a girl climbing the stairs with an armful of books. Both laughed at their boldness, as if the scarf itself had urged them. The wool, still carrying the woman's blessing, settled easily across new shoulders and brightened the gray street. It did not feel traded, but entrusted. The scarf's fringe fluttered, tugging forward again, eager for the next life to brush against. The boy and girl watched it slip away, smiling with the secret knowledge that some gifts are meant to move. By the fountain, a fiddler rubbed warmth back into his knuckles and looked into a case that seemed to hold more hope than coins. The scarf scudded across the stones and settled against his boot like a dog that had chosen. "Well now," he said, voice the shape of a smile. He wrapped the wool around the fiddle's body while he tuned, a gentle buffer against the damp. When he set bow to string, the tune that rose was not complicated. 8 notes that rose and fell like the street's own breathing. But the sound gathered people as surely as any bell. The scarf glowed faintly in lamplight, and for a moment he felt he was not playing alone, but with the village itself. The air seemed to grow a size. When the tune paused, a small girl stepped forward with a coin clenched like courage, and placed it in the case as if setting down a candle in a church. The fiddler dipped his head. He lifted the scarf from the instrument, feeling it pulse with warmth, and tucked it around the girl's neck. "For the walk home," he said. She twirled once, dizzy with joy. At the turn, the scarf slipped loose, not carelessly, but with a kind of playful bow, and caught the next draft of wind. The fiddler watched it go, the echo of its heat still glowing in his fingers, and began a second tune that sounded like embers waking. Near the river path, where the wind was always a shade colder, a little one in a knitted hat searched the ground with frantic patience. A mitten lay stranded in a puddle, soaking up the season. The scarf drifted down the bank and draped itself across the child's shoulders as if it had been called by name. The little one startled, then sighed, one of those relieved sounds that seem older than the mouth that makes them. A parent lifted the soggy mitten between 2 fingers and grimaced, already apologizing to the day. The scarf wicked away the worst of the cold, its stripes brightening against the gray water and the reed-stubbled shore. Geese stitched the sky above, writing their simple letter over and over until even the river could read it. Go on, go on, go home. They walked to the footbridge, where the boards thumped hollow underfoot. The child, warmer, pointed at a leaf, caught where the current snagged the rail. "Saved," the parent said, rescuing it with a laugh. The scarf slid, asked politely to be let loose, and the parent, understanding what had been happening all along without needing to say so, lifted it into the wind. It sailed over the rail, hovered once like a gull deciding a path, then headed back toward roofs and brick and kettle steam. The child waved as one waves to a friend leaving in the right direction. Behind them, the river went on saying its one word. The air smelled like wood smoke and the faint edge of snow, far off, but coming. Twilight took the square in both hands and bent it toward evening. The young couple, the same 2 the scarf had once bound together, crossed beneath the stringed lights that would soon glow like constellations. The scarf drifted down and brushed their elbows, familiar as a memory that had waited all day to return. He caught one end, she caught the other. They looped it, not to tether themselves this time, but to cradle a sleeping dog someone else carried, its ears chilly in the breeze. "We can't keep it," he murmured, his voice gentler than before. "We can keep acting as if we had it," she answered, her eyes bright with both humor and certainty. They leaned closer, sharing warmth that needed no cloth. The scarf held their breath and their laughter for a few steps, then shifted, eager for the lane ahead. At the corner, they lifted the scarf together. "Back where it belongs," he said. She nodded toward the lane climbing toward Louise's windows, though she did not know Louise's name. Their hands brushed, lingering a moment longer, as though the scarf had left them with more than warmth. Together they cast it into the breeze with the grace of people sending a lantern on a river. The wool steadied, climbed in soft leaps, as though steps had been built of air heading home. The couple lingered under the first glow of lights, not stars, but enough. Louise had just set out an extra cup when the scarf tapped her window like a shy knuckle. She opened the sash, and it pressed into her arms of its own accord, a familiar weight returning from its errand. She held it to her face. In the wool, she found cinnamon, river cold, a breath of pear, the faint rosin of a bow, and that bright, indefinable residue of shared laughter. "Oh," she said, the word more breath than sound. She wrapped it once, twice, exactly as her mother had taught her, and felt not only warmer, but steadier, as though the scarf had laid across her shoulders all the hands it had met. On the sill, the steam of her tea curled up and vanished, replaced by a quiet that had nothing of emptiness in it. Outside, the wind moved on, satisfied. Later, when evening gathered the house into one room, Louise folded the scarf on the chair by the fire. Its stripes held a faint glow in the hearth light, as if the threads had learned to keep a little fire of their own. A step sounded in the hall. Her husband entered with 2 cups of tea, his sleeves rolled, his eyes soft with the kind of tired that still carries affection. Their child clambered onto the rug with a book, firelight brushing gold across their brown skin. Louise lifted the scarf and spread it across her husband's knees and her own, then let it fall further to make a shared lap where the child nestled too. "This travel today," she said, not as a boast, but as a blessing. No one asked for the story. The room already seemed to know. Logs settled. The kettle whispered. Louise ran her fingers along the fringe. Kindness, she understood, is a hearth that walks the village and comes home again. Nothing is ever truly lost when it has carried warmth from one heart to another.